Hello everyone, I'm McCall and I wanted to talk a little bit today about chakras, but first thing, let you know about what it is that I do. So I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little more about what a somatic therapist does, you can check the link down below this video. So chakras, dense topic. The thing about chakras is there's a lot of information out there. I'm not going to call it misinformation, just simply information, in which they go into all sorts of associations about what the chakras are, what they do, etc., etc. What's important to understand about the chakras is that they're simply, and just to keep it really, really basic, is that they're spinning vortices. Basically, if you can think about it this way, you have a stream of energy that is moving upward in the body and a stream of energy that is moving down. And as these two streams of energies intersect, it creates a spin. That's the generic. But what oftentimes you'll find on the internet is you find all sorts of color associations. You find associations related to glands in the body, different nerve plexuses. And I'm not saying any of these are inaccurate. These are all interesting information, but they're really not experiential. Well, perhaps colors maybe. What's important to understand about the chakras is that they are indeed experiential, meaning that everything that your mind, your mental emotional field translates for you to perceive, for you the personality to perceive, is usually stemming from one of these energy centers or chakras. So what I would like to do today is I'm going to go through the chakras as they relate to the elements primarily. And when I talk about the elements, I'm talking about the elements from the Indian system, so earth, air, fire, water, and then ether. Ether's kind of very, very, very subtle, and some systems claim that ether is actually a combination of all the elements. So to begin with, I'd like to talk about the first chakra. So the first chakra, the association is with survival. These are really the basic needs in life, and many of us never really progress past the basic needs of life, meaning food, shelter, water. And oddly enough, in this day and age, I find it kind of offensive, actually, that we've gotten to the point in human history where, there are people around the world, billions of people around the world, who still don't have clean water. It's unbelievable. But so a lot of these folks are actually stuck in first chakra matters, which are matters about survival. And first chakra matters are largely driven by fear. So the first chakra, the element, is the earth element. When I talk about an element being associated with a chakra, I'm actually talking about the dominant element in the chakra. Every chakra is not separate from every other chakra, so all the energies or the elemental associations are essentially intertwined. So first chakra, survival, earth element. You can think about it also along the lines of what happens when the elements combine. So earth element is associated with bone, so it's dense. So what happens when earth element mixes with water? Well, when earth element mixes with water, you get flesh. So then when you have earth element and it mixes with air, you get the skin. And you can think about that. Actually kind of makes sense. You think about it because it's solid, but it still breathes. I mean, the skin literally still breathes. So earth element mixed with the ether element, you get hair. Earth element mixed with fire, you're going to get your blood vessels. So again, earth element, root, you're talking about your physical, very, very, very physical plane of existence. So moving up now to the second chakra. You can think about the second chakra as being water. It's also sex. That's, you all have heard me talk about sex quite a bit. So the thing about sex is that sex is not just sex. Sex is your creativity. Sex is your capacity for procreation, obviously. And it's also your capacity, and it's really, in my opinion, it's one of the first steps towards enlightenment or achieving some degree of clarity, as well as sort of moving into the realm of more energetic woo-woo, multiple orgasms, visions, etc., etc. So a lot of the energy associated with the sexual chakra needs to be perked up, because you can think about it as a bit like a pond or a lake, and this water always settles to its lowest point. So what happens when a man becomes turned on, it's very similar to the application of fire, which I'll get to in a moment. What happens when you apply fire to water? Well, it creates steam, and this steam rises up and creates an internal pressure. So when I'm teaching a lot of my workshops, which I call sacred pressure, we often deal with sexual energy because it is one of the base level pressures. It is the steam that is agitated and that rises to the surface. So the sex chakra, water, once again, you start moving into the realm of fluids. The watery aspect of this particular energy vortex or vortice is semen or reproductive fluids in general. Then when you have water and it mixes with fire, what you get then is you get urine. Water, when it mixes with earth, you get blood. So that actually kind of makes a lot of sense too, because you think about blood, it has a great deal of iron in it. And the iron content of the blood is, very much earth element. So, water mixed with ether, saliva. And again, what we're looking at here is we're looking at how all the chakras combine. So etheric element starts to come into play up around the throat. So hence water plus ether, you get saliva. It makes sense. To me anyway. So then when you have water mixed with the air element, you get sweat. So moving on now up to the third chakra, this is the application of fire. So when a man starts to retain his sexual energy, what ends up happening is that a charge begins to build. And this charge basically begins to accumulate at the lower dantian, or below the navel, but above the belt line. So somewhere in that realm below the navel is where you're going to feel a spin or a pulse. And this is a storage center, I guess is really the best way to describe it, where this energy, because you've abstained from ejaculation in excess, begins to build up. When you get to the third chakra, what you're dealing with is the mixing of the water element with fire. Fire, in this particular case, is associated with your will or your power. Oftentimes we get stuck in life, or we feel relatively stuck in life rather, because we're not actually operating through our own power, our own will. When we're not operating from our own power, our own will, what's happening is that we're actually functioning through what I will refer to as like an external authority. An external authority is an authority like a school system or politics, religion, jobs, all sorts of things that tell you what to do with your life force, with your energy, are external authorities. And I'm not saying these are bad nor good, simply they just are. And every culture around the world has external authorities. And it's up to the individual to start to reclaim his will, reclaim his third chakra. And how you do that is you do it through your inner authority. Your inner authority are your instincts as well as your intuition. When you pay attention to these things, you gradually get your will back, because your body is where all the energy is. So if you're making decisions from here or from an external authority, what that essentially means is that you're making a decision from outside of the physical body itself. Again, which is not where the energy is. The energy lies here. It's in the body, in the form. So when, again, looking at the third chakra is when you start getting basic mental function. So, sort of what I mean by that is when the body is processing, or the subconscious is processing energy, and it starts communicating with you, you start to get things like thirst, which is fire plus air, which actually kind of neat to think about the thirst being fire plus air, because that's like, what happens when you blow air on fire? Well, it heats up the cinder, makes it hotter, which then will sort of evaporate all the water that's in the air, hence creating thirst. So fire plus water is kind of like your luster, your glow. It's kind of, that's the best way to really put it, is your sort of luster or glow. Fire plus earth would be sort of your downtime. You could call that, well, the books that I was reading calls it lazy. I don't like the term lazy necessarily, but it's downtime. We'll call it downtime. So it's when you decide that you don't want to do anything. That's when fire plus earth is happening. So then you have fire in general as it's associated with that center, which comes across as hunger. So again, we're looking at basic signals in the third chakra. These are signals that are very much about survival. So this brings up this idea of the lower three chakras being kind of a triangle. So you have third chakra, second chakra, first chakra. They all combine for your basic essential needs in life. So again, you're getting the signals from the body that tell you you're hungry, you're thirsty, you need rest, you need sleep. Sleep is fire plus ether. And then also, again, your sex drive, all these things come from the lower triangle. So moving on up now, we have the heart center. The heart center is the pivot point. It's the pivot point between an upper triangle and a lower triangle. So the pivot point, or the heart, is when you start to attune to those things in life which will bring you joy and love. The keynote, or the one word that I would use to describe the heart center, is desire. I don't want to refer to desire. Well, I'm not referring to desire in the sense of sex necessarily. However, what ends up happening at the heart level, which is dominated by air, is, you can think about it, what happens when you want to make love. So when you want to make love, that desire arises to make love. It's actually a desire to connect. And so that connection is your opportunity to feel and experience love. Now the question is what happens when a man ejaculates? Well, a man ejaculates, the energy is depleted, the pressure is depleted, so there's a disconnect in a lot of cases. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, I'm making generalizations here. And that disconnect usually will disconnect you from your heart. I'll speak for myself. I know when I ejaculate, I'm a bit like a wounded dog, and I want to go off into the corner and kind of lick my wounds and heal. I sort of want to be left alone. That's me. So desire, again, the air element, you can look at it at this level. So at the air element, you're getting movement. Air is like speed. You have hot, you add fire to air, you speed up the movement. You cool it down, you slow the movement. So this is one of the reasons why sexual arousal, this heat that's generated from sexual arousal, will increase respiration, increase the heart rate, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it's movement. So the fourth chakra is all about movement. So air plus earth is when you get a kind of a contracting force or a tension. Air plus ether, on the other hand, again, ether is not so dense, you get expansion or lengthening. So again, looking at this idea of combining elements, if you look at air plus water, that's when you get movement in general. Again, you can think about wind blowing across water. And again, all these references of how the elements move actually give you some idea how the activity in that particular part of the body, that particular center, then translates into sort of human experience. So finally, you get air plus fire. Air plus fire is when you get kind of shaking. I like to call this kind of the Kundalini effect. So a lot of people who have this latent energy that starts to come up in their life, or this Kundalini energy, this life force that starts to move through them more seamlessly, what ends up happening is oftentimes it'll hit some area where you're blocked. And when I talk about blocked, I'm simply talking about not surrendered. You're not allowing flow. It could be something as basic as, you're meditating and you're looking for something to happen. Well, that is a block. And so the block will sometimes create a jerk or a twitch or a shaking. And that is basically air plus fire. And again, you can always look at how these things are through what happens when you blow air on fire, that sort of thing. It just agitates the fire and creates more movement of fire. So now we're going to move up to the fifth chakra. Fifth chakra is the throat. The associations, we're always talking about blue colors and, the thyroid and all these kinds of things. But on an experiential level, we start, again, moving through the elements. When we get to the level of the throat, we're getting into the ether. And the ether is the mind. And then the mind is, on this level, the mind, what I'm looking at is more like the emotions and how the ajna translates it for the personality to perceive. So the emotions that rise up are then translated. You, the personality, is actually just experiencing a vibration. And let's say the vibration is rising up from your gut. It's fire. So the fiery heat of the gut or the willpower center, and let's say your will feels off. So you will experience anger. Anger, as it rises to the surface, is not anger. It's simply a vibration that your mind then translates into anger. It's an association. So water now, as it rises to the surface for you to witness as an emotion, is that of love. And again, water is associated with sex, going back to chakra 2. As air rises to the surface, you have desire. Desire, again, air, the heart. Let's see. Earth element, as it rises to the surface, is fear. And again, all the stuff at the level of the throat is all about the translation of the vibration into emotion. So generally, the etheric element is associated with grief, and that one I have to admit I don't understand. But again, what's important to understand here is if you carry a lot of tension at the throat, a lot of discomfort at the throat, what's happening is that there's some emotional content that is not being expressed or is being overly expressed. So, and again, the throat is also associated with manifestation. Manifestation is your will center. So it's the will as you claim your own will, your own will builds, the energy wants to be expressed out into the world. And that's why the throat is often associated with manifestation as well as communication and hearing. So moving up to the ajna. Now the ajna has the capacity to perceive all elements. When I talk about perceiving all elements, what I mean is this is the area where hypothetically you could do a visualization. Let's say picture water. And so if you're picturing water, where do you feel that in your body? Because there will almost always be an association somewhere in the physical form. Or if you're gazing out at, let's say, a lake or a pond, you may feel that in your body as well. So again, what's happening at the third eye point is the energy goes in and out. And so this vibration that is water is received simply as a vibration. Again, it's the mind that translates it into a physical form and says, hey, that is water. Again, that's part of what the Buddhists or the Hindu folks and the Eastern folks would call the illusion about our reality, is that everything that is material is actually simply a vibration. So anything that you can reproduce in your mind's eye, the body will respond in a very similar way on some level relative to actual elements. So if you picture fire, in some cases you may actually feel that in your belly, and you may feel it as heat. So again, the ajna, all the elements are there. And what's also important to understand about the ajna, and there's a lot of people get very excited about opening up their ajna, the third eye point. It's hard to open up unless you're meditating a lot or a fair amount, or at least a little bit. Because what's important to understand about the ajna, the third eye point, is that if it's cluttered with thought, if you're too busy processing, emotional patterns, thought forms, etc., then that's what you're engaged with. Now, if you start to allow these things simply to flow past, you cease to identify with the thoughts and the emotions as they rise by. That's the beautiful thing about meditation, is you'll learn to be present to these things as opposed to repressing or expressing them. And as these things begin to flow by over time, the subconscious starts to show you, more subtle aspects of our reality. So we start to be able to receive visions, and our intuitive sense, again, this is where intuition lies. Our intuitive sense, or our ability to perceive, visually with our mind's eye, is enhanced through meditation because of that processing of past mental patterns and emotional patterns. So, final chakra, crown. The crown chakra is, I want to keep it real basic. You could call it your higher self. It's kind of the collective consciousness that you tap into. To me, the crown chakra is very much about, as you've sort of cultivated all the chakras below it, as you've eaten correctly, as you now are expressing your will authentically, you've found your true voice, you're following your navigation of the heart, all these different things, what it's doing is it's building up this energetic pressure. You become more centered. And, and again, this basic idea of the reason why you need to be more centered and to, be working with your form is not only because the energy is here, but the more centered you are, then, again, we'll use the term love, you're really, truly, truly loving yourself. Once you love yourself, you can express that love more clearly to the outside world, to your partners, to your lovers, etc. So the crown chakra, once again, is very dependent on everything else that's going on below it. And so what ends up happening is once the crown chakra begins to open, you have more of these universal concepts start to come into play. The ability to perceive subtle things, to see the interconnectedness of all things, and you really move towards that union, that yoking, which Tantra and yoga are all about. So to conclude, what I'd like to talk about is, what's important when you're in meditation relative to the chakras. What's important in meditation relative to the chakras is, again, it's on an experiential level, on the sort of feeling, sensing level. And so if you're meditating on the chakras, you might feel a pulse, perhaps a spinning sensation, or heat, tingles, all these sorts of things. They're all relevant. They are basically touch points or contact points for you, your personality, your ego, to then connect with. And they're concentration points. And so you can concentrate on the chakras, and as you're concentrating on the chakras, information and content may come to the surface. Some of this information and content may be fantastic. It may be really, really interesting. And people go, oh, I had past life experiences, and, I experienced aliens and ghosts and, any number of really interesting manifestations, from like flashes off in your peripheral vision to seeing colors and all sorts of stuff. Oftentimes, what comes to the surface are really just mundane things. And so, like, one of the most mundane things that I experienced when I was meditating on, say, my root chakra was terror. Terror and fear. Terror and fear kept coming up. once I recognized it as a pattern, then I was able to be present to it. And once I was able to be present to it, I was no longer sort of identified with the fear and the terror. I was simply present to it. So, which allowed the pattern then to evolve. And so nowadays I don't get really intense terror or fear coming to the surface anymore. So what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter what comes up. It doesn't matter if your grocery list pops into your head. Like literally everything is equal. And the reason why everything is equal is whether it's super, super woo-woo or if it's mundane, it's all about presence. When you're in meditation, it's about presence and allowing all the content to come to the surface simply to be perceived and witnessed and allowed to move on. So with all that said, hopefully you learned a little bit about chakras, and hopefully you can digest this information. I know it's a dense, difficult topic. So with that, thank you much. Hope all's well.